Distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please stand and welcome into the ballroom former Malaysian Prime Minister, His Excellency Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. Distinguished guests, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome on stage Vishwa Sadasivan. Mr. Sadasivan is CEO of Strategic Moves, a corporate strategy and crisis communications consultancy practice. As a well-known TV anchor of current affairs programs in the 80s and 90s, he has interviewed leaders such as Tunku Abdul Rahman and Lee Kuan Yew. Mr. Sadasivan served a term as nominated Member of Parliament in Singapore. Mr. Sadasivan will be moderating our dialogue with His Excellency Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. Welcome, Mr. Sadasivan.
Thank you. There was a time when I didn't need my glasses, but I've been told that I look a lot more distinguished and learned and intellectual. Well, it's very, very difficult to introduce a man of today's guest standing. It's been said that the art of leadership is saying no, not saying yes. Saying yes, we all know, is quite easy, especially to our wives. In fact, that's a duty. But by that measure, our honorable guest today is legendary for going against the grain, unabashedly, defiantly, undeterred by global pressure and contention. He stood up very much alone to the financial world with controversial measures that isolated his country from the global economy. This took guts, gumption, and a huge dose of self-belief. He has shaped his country's economy, culture, people, the polity, with an influence oddly disproportionate to its modest population globally. I wouldn't be exaggerating if I were to describe him as a global voice, not an echo. Physician, politician, head of state, author, orator, even a blogger. And at one point, early in his life, he was even an entrepreneur. And guess what? He started off selling, I'm told, goreng pisang, when he was much younger, you see. I mean, it's an amazing man with so many things he's able to do in his life. The many, many faces of Dr. M make him the country's boldest and perhaps the most fascinating public personality. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the man, the maverick, and Malaysia's fourth Prime Minister, Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. Would you like to sit on that side?
Yes.
Selamat datang, Tun.
Terima kasih.
Well,
Sesi.
Siashani, you missed out Tamil, no?
Oh, I forgot to learn.
Nandri.
Nandri, yes, of course.
Well, I think to kick it off, we have about an hour, slightly over an hour of discussion. Singapore is no stranger to you. You did your medical school
Medical
here.
school here.
And I gather that you just had a class reunion
That,
in KL. And so you want to share with us what your memories were in Singapore as a student?
well, those were great days. I came here when Singapore was a colony, and it was not so big as it is now. And the roads were very narrow, the shop houses were like other shop houses. You know, the shop houses have disappeared. They have been replaced by this high-rise building. Now I will lose my way. Before I knew Kuala Lumpur like the back of my hand, but not now.
Actually, a lot of Singaporeans, when you travel, when you leave the country and stay there for about 6 months to a year, you come back, you also lose your way. Right. And just as a trivia, do you know what used to be this place where we are now?
Well, I think it's still the sea. It could have been
No.
the sea because you have been reclaiming a lot. The outline of the island is no longer what I knew.
I know that's a bit of a controversy. See how he leads the discussion. Actually, I'm supposed to lead the discussion. Very, very challenging. I know where he's going, to a little island and territory. Amazing man. But we shan't go there. This used to be Raffles Institution.
Oh? Yeah,
The
I know.
oldest school in Singapore used to be exactly where we are now. It's called Raffles Institution, Singapore's premier institution, built in 1823, 4 years after Singapore was founded in 1819 by Sir Stamford Raffles using his own money. And we tore it down.
Yes.
And on that very somber note, maybe we should start the discussion. I'd like to start by asking you for your views on something that is obviously very close to your heart and something that you're known for, which is leadership, right? And, you know, maybe the best way in which you demonstrated your leadership was in 1997, during the Asian currency crisis, where you stood out and stood firmly against the global trend and against IMF, for example, you know. And that sort of tenacity is something we don't find very much these days. And last September in Kuala Lumpur, you said about leadership, you said, when necessary, I will be nasty. That's my reputation. Leaders need to be criticized. During my time, I was not only criticized, but also challenged.
Right.
You really said this.
Yeah.
And during the currency crisis in 97, you went against the grain and imposed currency control measures to manage volatility, the volatility of the Malaysian ringgit. And IMF and many other economists around the world, and even in your own country, economists were saying that it's not going to work. Many said that it was harebrained, but you still stood firm. And in the end, the then IMF MD, Michael Kemdisis, admitted, and he said, Malaysia was correct in asserting that it did not need an IMF package to get it through the crisis. Could you share with us what exactly went through your mind when you stood firm? Was it stubbornness?
No. When somebody gives you advice, you have to study the advice that is given, whether it is for his good or your good. And when the IMF gave me this whole list of things that I have to do in order to recover, I studied it very carefully. It took me almost 1.5 years to study these few pieces of advice. And I tried to find something positive about those advice given to me to help Malaysia recover. And I found that it will make things worse. That's why I rejected it. It was a very frightening moment to go against practically the whole world. But really, if you follow the advice of the IMF and the World Bank, you're going to make things worse. And because of that, I had to spend time studying very carefully, reading books, asking people, having committee meetings and things like that, before I decided that, yes, the advice was no good, and therefore I have to do something else. I had to study banking, for example, about which I know nothing. I'm a doctor of medicine. What do I know about banking, about finance? But I was forced to, and in the end, of course, we decided that we'll do it our own way. And that's what we did.
And you proved that Malaysia boleh.
Yeah, Malaysia boleh, but it wasn't all that easy, because when you take a decision to do something that is odd, that is non-conventional, there's bound to be a lot of repercussion. You have to think forward as to how do you deal with the things that can happen. They said that the currency will just collapse completely. So what do you do to prevent that happening? There would be a lot of problem with the banks. How do you deal with the bank? And a whole number of things were thought up and anticipated. And we set up small committees to look into all these areas. And fortunately, they managed to counter the possibility of things going wrong because of the decision.
And it'll never be a perfect solution, and you were aware of that.
Yeah, and there is no such thing as a perfect decision or a perfect solution.
Yeah.
Every solution brings with it a lot of, unforeseen things.
Yeah. You know, when I was reading your accounts and what was really going on at that point, what came to my mind is, one of the things I do is I coach and consult CEOs on crisis management. And if I can be very frank, one of the challenges that CEOs face today is they listen too much to lawyers.
They listen?
Yeah, and somehow lawyers in organizations seem to make decisions about what is the right thing to do. Because you naturally consult a lawyer because there's a lot of culpability issues, right? So the CEOs consult the lawyers, they consult the subject matter specialists at an operational level, and they then say, and lawyers generally are paid to say, no, don't do it, right? So as a result, the CEOs, in my view, sometimes abdicate their responsibility to do the right thing and just go by what the lawyers advise them. Now, that's quite similar to the situation you faced. You are not a subject matter expert, but the decision, the responsibility of making the decision and to be accountable for that decision was yours. So you consulted people, and I'm sure there were economists and subject matter specialists who advised you against it, against what you want to do. But in the end, you made your own decision. That's leadership, not management. And to a large extent, I would say that that brand of leadership seems to be missing quite a bit in the world today. A crisis of leadership, some say. What's your view on that?
Well, I'm quite sure there are lots of people who have the capacity but are not given the chance to become leaders. They want to be safe. Politics is very dirty, and lots of people don't want to be criticized, so they stay away from politics. But they are capable leaders. So we get people who are not so capable to lead countries, unfortunately.
I'm tempted to ask you which countries, but I dare not. That will amount to sometimes scoring your own goal. But we shan't go there. But what were the key lessons as a leader that you learned? I mean, 97, 98 was probably one of the most significant periods in your life in politics, not just as Prime Minister. Of course, what happened in the early 70s was also very important, right? When you wrote The Malay Dilemma, right? We can go to that in a while, but 97, 98 was crucial. What were the lessons in leadership that you'd like to share with the many leaders in front of you?
Well, as I said just now, one has to look at all solutions critically. And to a certain extent, you must have the backing of your own knowledge, apart from asking other people. Because in the end, you have to make the decision. And the decision must be the result of examining all the advice that you get. I don't listen to lawyers mainly because they don't like me. At some stage in my career, I said, the first thing we do, we hang the lawyers. I was quoting Shakespeare. It's not me, you should blame Shakespeare. But they don't like me. The Bar Council in Malaysia never likes me, so I don't listen to them very much. I listen to other people who understand finance better, banking better, economy better, and many of them gave contradictory advice. So it's for me to finally make a decision. And that decision must be based on a lot of background things like knowledge, reading, acquiring as much information as possible, studying data. It was not an easy thing, something that you just comes off from your mouth as if you don't think. You have to think. A leader must have the capacity to think, to analyze, and to make educated decisions, not just to be popular.
You're definitely not someone who seeks popularity. Or if you are, then I don't think you may have succeeded very much. I don't think popularity is something that defines you. You are popular, but you're not seeking it. But how did you manage the discord that must have existed among your leaders, among your leadership, in trying to persuade them that this is the way to go? Because quite a few leaders at that point in time may have had cold feet to go against the international consciousness on this.
Well, in the first place, if you have to make a decision, you must really be convinced that the decision is good and you can defend it. In fact, when I suggested currency control, there was a lot of opposition. One of the intellectuals actually gave 32 different reasons why I should not do what I proposed to do. But I argued my way with him and demolished his reasons one by one. And in the end, he did not have an answer. So I thought that I must be right. If I can demolish 32 different reasons, I must be right. So I was a little bit more, less afraid perhaps. And in the end, one has to make a decision, one way or another. And if you are convinced that what you have worked out is correct, I think that gives you some strength, less fear to make the decision. But it takes time.
But so you said you demolished 32 of those ideas that were presented to you. I mean, there are different ways you demolish. One, you demolish using reasoning. The other, you demolish using a bomb.
No bombs.
No bombs, huh?
Reason.
As in, you demolish arguments out of fear. Some people, obviously these people are uninformed, mischievous, they describe you as a dictator. You don't look like a dictator to me.
Yeah. Tell me, which dictator voluntarily resigned at the peak of his career? Which one? Did Hitler resign? I resigned. I should have stayed on actually, but I resigned.
Do you think if you stayed on, your popularity would have gone up or down?
It will go down. It will go down, quite definitely, but not so far down that I would be kicked out of my office. But when you are in a place of being able to do something, then the people who criticize you criticize what you do. But they are not doing anything, so there is no issue with them, nothing to criticize them with. So as you stay in power, you will be making decisions, and every decision there will be people who are not appreciative or who do not like. So you will become less and less popular. You may see that after I stepped down, the succeeding government won the election with more than what I did. I used to win with 2/3 majority. He won with 90% majority. But it didn't last very long.
Why do you think so?
Well, they thought that this great dictator is now out of the way, and now we are going to have a new, maybe a new leader, or he must be doing the right things. But unfortunately, he did the wrong things. So he lost. In the next election, he couldn't achieve 90%, he couldn't achieve 2/3 majority, he barely managed to win.
Well, talking about doing the right thing and wrong thing, today, sad to say, the ringgit has actually fallen to a 5-year low. I believe it's a 5-year low. And this doesn't seem to be justified because the Malaysian economy seems to have quite a bit of the fundamentals right. So I spoke to quite a few economists before today, and they were generally quite puzzled why the ringgit is actually dipping at a point when the fundamentals are reasonably good. And does this point to perhaps that it was perhaps not the right decision to float the ringgit again?
Well, I think
floated again 5 years ago.
floating is not something that I believe in, because it will subject the currency to a lot of manipulation, speculation by people who wants to make money. If you can move the ringgit up and down, if the ringgit is stable, you can't make money. So they have to move the ringgit to make money. Maybe it is because they see an opportunity to make money that they devalue the ringgit. But if you look at the fundamentals, as you say, Malaysia, I think, is slightly better than, my apologies to Thailand. Thailand is, I don't think the fundamentals are as good as in Malaysia. Yet the Thai baht has appreciated against the Malaysian ringgit. There must be something they see which I cannot see. You see, but maybe also in the case of Malaysia, they don't go by the fundamentals alone. They see other things which they believe would hurt the economy, and therefore they devalued the ringgit. But I think for as long as there are currency traders, we are going to suffer from this disease of devaluing and revaluing and devaluing, because without movement, you can't make money. So you must play around.
So do you think the decision in 2005 to float the ringgit again was right or wrong?
Well, I told the government in an indirect way that they should not float the ringgit. But they said that you'll be within some control range. But that is not going to be easy. And the currency traders can still play with the ringgit and devalue it.
So talking about people who chocho with the ringgit, chocho, by the way, is a local parlance for playing with the ringgit. How is your good friend George Soros doing these days?
Well,
I hear you.
He himself
good
has
friends
condemned currency trading. He has condemned currency trading. I met him, I talked to him. I wasn't fighting with him. I thought that he did not support Bush, and I didn't like Bush either. So I wrote to him asking him to condemn killing people in wars. But he believes in killing people in wars. So we couldn't agree on that either. But otherwise, he's okay.
Why can't all politicians give interviews like you? Huh?
I'm a good entertainer.
You know, for the longest time, people have been talking about the Pacific century. A bit jala, a bit tired listening, but nothing seems to be. But the world, especially the Western world, doesn't seem to really give sufficient recognition to the fact that Asia, for many years, have been doing a lot better than the rest of the world. And while there is acknowledgement to some extent of the economic growth of the major engines of growth in Asia, in particular China, India, Indonesia, and so on, there doesn't seem to be sufficient recognition that Asia is doing exceptionally well. As they say, we don't seem to be given our place in the sun. Is that cultural? Is that because the world is still very much dominated by the West, the Western media? Or is it because we are really not as good?
You know, the world has been Eurocentric. Asia has been looking at Europe for guidance for 400 years. It's not easy to get over that almost spontaneous wish to look at Europe and see what it's doing. So we don't want to show our own self as we are. You know, we should. You know, Mr. Kuan Yew has always insisted that there is such a thing as an Asian culture. Of course, the Europeans will say there is no such thing as an Asian culture. The universal culture is the European culture.
And universal values.
And we still subscribe to that.
Yeah.
Many of us still subscribe to that. I noticed, for example, that now the hairstyle is the Mohican style hairstyle. And I see young people cutting their hair like that. They have a problem. You know, they ill-treated the Red Indians in the past. Now they want to make amends. At one time, they had the Afro hairdo because they used to treat the blacks as their slaves. Now they want to say, we are like you. But what has that got to do with Asians? Why do we have to follow them? Now they write things on the walls and all that, graffiti. Why are we following them? We shouldn't. Stand on your own feet and say what you have to say about things that they do, which is wrong. You have to criticize the Europeans because really, they are mismanaging their own countries, their finance. They can't get out of this financial crisis for so long. It is because they are in the wrong. I told them, I mean, on BBC, I was interviewed. I said, you must admit that your system is wrong and go back to doing real business, producing goods or services and earning money from that. Playing around with money is not the way to do business. But of course, they still reject because they think that the world is still Eurocentric. It's no longer that Eurocentric, but it's going to take time before we become Asia-centric.
You said something very interesting. That's why I'm looking at the quotation. You said in February of 2012, in an interview, you said, Europe is poor, so should live within its means. Europe has lost a lot of money, and therefore you must be poor now relative to the past. In Asia, we live within our means. So when we are poor, we live as poor people. I think that is a lesson Europe can learn from Asia. You refuse to acknowledge, referring to European leaders, that you've lost money and therefore you're poor. And yet you can't remedy that by printing money. Money is not something you just print. It must be backed by something, either good economy or gold. What do you mean?
Isn't that true? You know, Europe, during the time when they dominated commerce throughout the world, they could raise the price of whatever they produce to any level, in order to accommodate the demands of their workers. So they pay their workers very high salaries. And then when Asian countries came into the market, they find that they couldn't compete with products from Japan, Korea, or China. But they still want to pay their workers high salaries. So you will remain uncompetitive because you want to live as if you're rich, but you are no longer rich. It's time that they cut down on their salaries, cut down on their expenditures, live like poor people, work like poor people. I'm quite sure they will be able to compete with the Asians again. But they are in a state of denial. They think what they are doing is right, what we are doing is wrong. So they are trying to push up our wages. But we will remain below them and be competitive. They will pay high wages and they cannot go into manufacturing anymore.
But don't you think that it is not a bad thing to increase wages in Asia, in many Asian countries? Because for the longest time, the wages have been artificially suppressed.
Yeah, you can increase wages, but not through having strikes and demands and closed shops and things like that. You can raise wages accompanied by higher productivity, and therefore your cost of unit costs would remain low and you would be competitive. But if you raise wages without accompanying productivity, you are going to price yourself out of the market. Yes, you enjoy good wages, but you can't sell your goods. In the end, you have to close down. And what are the good wages for? You can't pay anymore. You are on dole. That's their system.
So your point about living beyond your means, there's an interesting question from, we have this gadget where we have questions from the floor that's coming up. Can we put up question 195, please? I don't know why it's 195. I only see 3 questions here. Okay, question number 195. And the question, Tun, is, do you agree that Malaysia's gravest political challenges are democracy deficit and aristocratic surplus? The suggestion here is that there are Malaysians who are living beyond their means. The very advice that you gave Europe.
Yeah, individual Malaysians, yes. Some of them are very rich. We even now have billionaires now in ringgit, of course, not in Singapore dollars. You see?
Which is at an all-time low.
Yeah, they have the money, they can spend. But when people do not have money and you spend, that's when you go wrong. That's when you get bad results. In Malaysia, you talk about democracy. We are democratic. We are democratic. Of course, not liberal democracy like in some other countries, in the sense that we can choose our leaders. In every election, the opposition will win some seats, sometimes more, sometimes less. But there has never been on an occasion when the ruling party wins 99% of the seats. So to me, that is democratic. Of course, there are other things added, human rights, freedom of the press, freedom of speech and all that. All those things we have, but there are limits. There is no such thing as having freedom without limits. You know, you have freedom without limits, you are going to have Charlie, Charlie Hebdo. You should be sensitive. I can walk up to somebody and say, I curse him. He's going to take objection. I can say, look, that is my free speech. You can't curse people. You have to be sensitive to other people's feelings. So in Malaysia, we have 3 different races. They are all very active. And we cannot go and insult each other or make demands which the others cannot give. So we have to limit our freedom so as not to create, turmoil in the country. So our democracy is in the sense of choosing leaders. I was challenged. Fortunately, I won. But challenges you have to face as a leader. But when you have a situation where you cannot be challenged at all, then of course there is no democracy. In Malaysia, you have democracy. Leaders have changed in Malaysia.
So it's been said that countries such as Malaysia, Singapore, there's indirect form of coercion, sometimes direct, in the form of institutions such as the Internal Security Department, Malaysia Special Branch, and so on. Now, even though you may not really employ them for reasons not intended, against your political opponents, for example, that's not the intention of these organizations, but it has been suspected, in some cases not without evidence, that these measures have been used against political opponents. Now, how true is that?
I don't think it is completely true. There may be some abuses of the authority given to the government, but by and large, people can say what they like in Malaysia. They mustn't go beyond the limits, but they have the right amount of freedom as to be expected in a democracy.
But in a democracy today, for example, why do we still need these institutions?
We need the institution. You just ask America. President Bush copied our ISA. And, now...
After 9/11.
Yeah, after 9/11, yes. We had the insurgency in Malaysia, so we have to be very careful about that so that it will not return. So like the US, we don't have the Patriot Act, but we had the ISA. Now we have done away with it. But in certain situations, even the liberals appreciate the need to curb people a bit. And in America, the curbing is very, very severe. You cannot say anything that is not right and without having the authorities jump on you. But in Malaysia today, I think we are more free than in America.
But what is the need for extra legal measures?
No, it is not extra legal. Whatever we do is provided by the law. Laws, there are two types of laws. One is in order to punish you when you commit a crime or you do something wrong against the law. The other is preventive law, to prevent you from committing a crime. So, as you know, Guantanamo Bay, of course, is there because they don't want these terrorists to commit acts of terror. So we did the same here, but not so severe. We don't allow for torture, for example. But they are perhaps more intelligent than we are, so they include torture as well. But people on their own restrain themselves. Depends upon the culture of the society. In some societies, they're very belligerent. People will go and kill because they don't like somebody else. Some countries are totally unstable. They fight each other, they kill each other. Do we want that in Malaysia? I don't think we want. I don't know what others may want that, but we don't want. We want to have a stable, peaceful society. So we don't allow people to provoke other people and destabilize the country. So you make a little bit of sacrifice on the interpretation of your freedom, but it is for your own good.
Well, democracy is obviously very close to your heart, right? And interestingly, quite a few of the archetypal leaders of Asia, in Southeast Asia, have been described as benign dictators, some not so benign as others, right? We've had, and all these leaders actually went in to reform, to make the country a lot better. Example, Ferdinand Marcos of the Philippines. In the first decade, he was an outstanding president. He made reforms that really helped the country. President Suharto, right? Tremendous reform, especially agricultural, right? Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, right? And then we have yourself. You served 22 years as Prime Minister, the longest serving at that point. Now, there's been an argument that perhaps there should be a limit to the tenure of presidents or heads of government. What's your view on that?
Well, there should be limits, of course. But when you have authority, you mustn't allow it to go to your head and think you can do everything or anything that you like. There are limits that you can go to. If you are willing to limit yourself in the use of your authority, you can become popular. You can be re-elected at every election. But some, of course, manipulate election. Nobody can win except him. That, of course, is not the kind of benevolent dictatorship that you are talking about. Of course, there are various degrees. Different people have different ideas. In the case, I can't speak about other countries. In the case of Malaysia, we have no limits to the period you can become a leader. You can keep on winning, going for elections. But it's up to the leader to decide so much and no more. After 22 years, I thought I should step down. In fact, I wanted to step down when I had 18 years in the seat, but things was not doing well at that time, including the financial crisis, so I had to delay by 3 years. I didn't tell anybody, not even to my wife. And then I announced that I wanted to step down. But some feel that once they are in the position of power, they do not want to give up the power. That's bad. What they have done for the country is good, but you have to tell yourself that don't overstay your welcome. So if you do that, I think you wouldn't go down in history as a real dictator. It's just a beneficent dictator.
Well, some countries have fixed tenure. Like the Philippines, the head of government, the president, has only 2 terms. No matter how popular you are, you step down after 2 terms. That seems to be what's advocated in many other developed societies. Do you think Asian leaders should also go with that? I mean, whether it's 18 or 22 years, it's still very long.
Yeah.
But the point is, 2 terms. Is that good for the economies in Asia? Because the disadvantage is you don't have enough of a runway to make real changes, to oversee the changes.
Yeah.
That's the downside.
Yeah, when the period is too short, you will not be able to achieve anything. You see Japan, for example, they have prime ministers every 2 years. It is now my turn, you should go. It's not about running the country. It's about being prime minister. And they cannot resolve their financial problem over so many years until someone came along who was given a longer term and he was able to solve some of the problems. You need quite a number of years merely to learn to become prime minister or president. I find that the American system, for example, of 2 terms, the first year, he's learning how to be the president. Second year, he may think about doing something. He may have learned something about his country. Third year, he begins to plan. Fourth year, he's thinking of the next election. So he couldn't do anything about his plan. And then he is re-elected, and he becomes a lame duck president. Nobody cares about him. That is not a government. To me, a government should be headed by somebody who is given sufficient time to learn, because there is no school for teaching us how to be a good prime minister or president. You have to go through being a prime minister or president to learn all about the job. And then you begin to think about what you can do for the country. And then you begin to implement. And if you implement and you don't oversee, because your term is over, the next prime minister or the next president will say, I'm not going to follow the previous one. I am going to leave my own legacy. And so he strikes off in another direction, and he too cannot finish. And then there's another prime minister comes along or president comes along. the same thing happens. So we need to give time for leaders to think about his job, to learn about his job, to understand the extent of his power, and to plan for the good of the country. But if he stays too long, then it goes to his head. Then he forgets about his duty to the country and the people. He wants to enjoy life.
And you lose the plot in the process. You lose the plot in the process. But it's been said, Tun, that, as you would have heard of this saying, right? Power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, corruption is something that several leaders have been accused of, alleged to have been involved in. Mm-hmm. You yourself,
thank you,
have had people suggest, accuse, allege that you were corrupt.
Yeah.
What would you say when you're a leader?
Well, when you are a leader and in a position to be corrupted, the assumption of people is that you must be corrupt. Even if you are not corrupt, they will say you are corrupt because you are in a position to be corrupt. But what is the evidence that I took money from the government? I gave money back to the government? Yes. You can see a whole house built to show all the gifts that I received, which I gave back. I didn't take the 24 motor cars given to me. They all belong to the government. I don't take. I don't see a need to take any money because I'm a very frugal person. And I don't spend money even on myself. And the government pays me quite well, $20,000. I was earning 2,000 ringgit when I was practicing medicine. 20,000 is a lot of money. And they pay for my travel, they pay for my electricity, water supply, housing. What do I need money for? I know I cannot take it like the pharaohs, they can take it after they die, but I can't.
It's at one point you were even ranked informally as one of the richest men in the world. The interesting thing is, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew at one point said that he may be one of the highest paid ministers in the world, but probably the poorest. You know what that means?
Well, I'm subjected to investigation. So far, I've been retired a long time. There were attempts to find out how much money I took from the government by some unfriendly people, and they found nothing. They wanted to bring me to court, and after 10 years, 11 years, they found nothing. I don't live a very lavish life. I don't play golf and things like that. I travel minimally, and I spend my time working still.
And writing books.
Writing books, writing on my blog, and working. Why should I work? I don't have any pay, but I still work. I work from morning until about 7 o'clock every day, excepting for Saturdays and Sundays. I used to work Saturdays, but now the present government says you should not work on Saturdays.
So you're very obedient.
Yeah, I work. I don't get any pay because I get my pension, $10,000. That is about 3,000 Singapore dollars, I think. That's my pay, my pension now, and I'm very happy. I used to measure my wealth through the number of plates of me I can take. I can take any number of plates of me now because I have enough money. There was a time when I wanted to buy a plate of money, of me, I couldn't buy because I had only 20 cents.
When I first saw you just now, what I told Tun, Dr. Mahathir, was, and I wasn't trying to angkat. Angkat means carry. I actually told him, you look a lot more handsome in person. Don't you think he's an extremely handsome man? Please do not mistake me for my sexual preference. This is just a very platonic comment. But I would like to say that one of the reasons why I believe that you still look so youthful and dashing is because of your sense of humor. Tun, you're turning 90 this year. 90. And isn't he an extremely handsome man? So, I say unabashedly, when I grow up, I want to be like you.
You have grown up already.
Did you hear what he said? I've grown up already. What is the secret of your youth?
Yeah, I get asked this question many times. I normally tell people that I will write about it sometimes so that I can sell the secret. But I don't know why. It so happens that I live beyond my time, perhaps. I should have gone by now. Many of my friends have gone. But what is the secret? I think keep on working after you retire.
Once
you retire and you just mope, stay at home and worry about things, you are going to grow old and you are going to drop dead. So as a medical practitioner, I used to tell people who are pensioned, when they came to see me about their ailments, I told them, please do something, go do something, get interested. Once you lose interest in life, well, what is life for? Yeah.
Well, I just want to know whether there's anyone on the floor who would like to ask a question. We've got about 15 minutes more. Anyone? Don't be shy. Anyone? Don't say I didn't give you a chance to do this. If not, I'll ask you a question that was asked here. Question number 202, please. I don't know why they're such big numbers. Do you think Iskandar is too big to fail and will therefore succeed? It's a very odd kind of question, no? Do you think Iskandar is too big to fail and will therefore succeed? Sounds like a Singaporean. We cannot ask simple questions, no? Must go one round. Come on, if you're a Singaporean, own up. How would you want to respond to this question?
Well, nothing is too big to fail. The Soviet Union, for example, was very big, but it failed. Lots of big things fail, unless, of course, somebody rescues them. Most of the American banks would now be bankrupt, except for this Queen Elizabeth, quantitative easing, QE. You see?
Queen Elizabeth, for a moment I was wondering, what has she got to do with this?
I can't remember the word quantitative or qualitative easing, so I always go back to
easing,
Queen Elizabeth. Then I remember QE.
QE,
Yeah, QE. Old people must use these mnemonics in order to remember things.
And, well, you know, the other thing that a lot of people find quite amazing is people such as yourself, such as Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, you picked up something like the internet when you were in your late 70s, you know, and then you become so savvy. Now you're a blogger at 90, an active, very active blogger. I mean, that's really quite fascinating, and it's a huge inspiration for people of your age, in fact, people of my age as well, you know. What makes you want to blog? And what are your thoughts about the impact of social media in the world today?
Well, when I stepped down from being Prime Minister, and I found that I was being blocked. I was being blacked out. Whatever I say cannot get into the papers. People invite me to give talks. They were asked to withdraw the invitation. I was cut off completely. And I need to communicate with people. And I found that the internet provides a good medium for me to reach people. And I had a need to say things, critical things, of course, of the government which blocked me. So I use the internet to communicate with people. I think that's the way to use the internet. You should argue with people. They can attack you. That's fine. In a democracy, you don't expect to be praised all the time. But if they go against you, you have to reply intelligently, of course, based on facts. And it's up to the people who read to decide whether what I say is right or what they say is right. So I think it's a good media. The only thing I don't like about the blog, the internet is pornography. That I don't like. So I think we should have some limits to this freedom. Pornography is not good for anybody.
Yeah.
So I hope that somebody will dare to censor pornographic material on the internet. Otherwise, this is a new media, it's a good media, but you have to accept the fact that you will be criticized, but you must respond likewise.
You know, as a former prime minister, head of government, the age of 90, it is, I would imagine it's quite difficult, or rather it's not easy, to be attacked with the kind of language sometimes that comes through. They're not as polite as me, you know. They will not try and craft their language in a certain way where they are not offensive necessarily. There's also this shroud of anonymity. You can be anonymous, I can say what I want, I can hit and run. So what are some of the more belligerent kind of comments that you've had?
You have to put up with this. People are free to talk now. If they are in your country, perhaps you can grab hold of them and throw them in the clinker, but people from outside, you cannot do anything. When I decided on currency control, I was, told a lot of nasty things that would happen to me. That's all right. I have to prove.
And threats? Were there threats?
Huh?
Were there threats?
Well, there were threats, a lot of threats. But if you believe in what you are doing, you should be able to explain why you are doing it and make sure that you succeed. Nothing succeeds like success.
Well, maybe it's time for me to wrap by asking you, unless there's someone to ask a question or comment. If not, maybe I'll just wrap by asking you a final question for this session. If there's one more big thing that you want to do, if God permits, if your health permits, what would that be? One thing.
Well, I have always been striving to give everybody a fair share of everything, political power and economic power. If there is anything I want to do is to see that everybody gets his fair share of power in Malaysia and wealth in Malaysia. I have been driving at it for all this while. I would still think that is the most important thing for Malaysia. Once we achieve that, we would be a very stable, very peaceful nation. Of course, there will be detractors, but that is to be expected. There is no such thing as a perfect solution. I accept that, but we should try for a solution, even though it is not perfect.
Thank you, Dr. Mahathir. And I just... You know, I'd like to end by saying that one of my all-time favorite quotations is by my good friend Albert Einstein, and he said, "Great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds." You're certainly not a mediocre mind. It's a privilege to have had this opportunity to speak with you. You're a great spirit. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tun Dr. Mahathir. Thank you, Mr. Sadasivan. May I ask our country head of Singapore, UBI Singapore, Mr. Edmund Koh, on stage to present a token of appreciation to His Excellency, Tun Dr. Mahathir. Thank you, His Excellency Tun Dr. Mahathir, and thank you, Mr. Sadasivan. Thank you, Mr. Edmund Koh. We also wish to take this opportunity to present the token of appreciation to Tun Dr. Siti Hasma, the great lady behind Tun Mahathir. We ask Mrs. Edmund Koh to present our gift to Tun Siti.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, may we stand and give Tun Mahathir a show of our appreciation again with a round of applause as he and Tun Siti take their leave.